All right, let's go. We're with Garza, Gaitan, and the game. We're back at it again here. Daniel, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, Wadi. And you?
I love to hear it. I'm doing well. Can't complain at all. All right, we're going to start the podcast today with a focus. We're going to talk about who is winning the game this week and who is losing the game this week. Daniel, hit us off. Who do you think is winning the game and who's also losing it?
Yeah, my choice for this week on winning the game is going to be Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. Obviously he had a big meeting with Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu and tweeted out, under President Trump, American leadership is back. He says, this includes free speech, both diplomacy and, um, that puts our nation first, I believe is what he said. And, the whole peace through strength that was started by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. I like a return to that. His performance on Face the Nation was strong. I like the way he corrected Margaret Brennan on almost a repugnant, really, thesis that she put out that it was free speech that was weaponized by the Nazis that gave them the upper hand. I mean, just insane kind of take from Margaret Brennan, and so I think Marco Rubio shined on that.
And who on your end do you think is losing the game this week?
Losing the game, I think converse to Marco Rubio is Margaret Brennan, the same anchor from CBS. Look, I think she made an enormous error with that statement. It was, I think, a terrible take, and of course she got excoriated by the folks on Twitter and or X universally. And to rewrite history like that, just to push some kind of agenda or some kind of narrative against the current administration, it just kind of goes to show how far the Trump derangement syndrome can go. And she was taken to the woodshed on that, and rightfully so. So I still think that we need to hear from Margaret Brennan and CBS as well. But enough of that. What was your take? Who's winning the game this week, Wadi?
Yeah, I think for sure. JD Vance is, in my opinion, vice president, is basically doing a tour through Europe. He had what I think are probably his two biggest speech to date. One of them being on a focus on artificial intelligence, the rise of technology. He really positioned the United States as a country who's ready to lead on this topic. He really kind of criticized the European nations, kind of saying that their approach to AI and technology has been one more of kind of saying they were scared, very preventative, very focused
Mm.
on what might be the negative impacts. I mean, his speech didn't say that we shouldn't worry about those things, but he's saying let's lead with innovation, let's lead into these areas. He emphasized the need for how like job creation is going to come out of this, how we've always seen disruptors. While it might seem like it might take away some jobs, but it builds a lot of jobs. So I think his skill set is in that space. Again, he worked at Silicon Valley. He has a an understanding, a nuanced understanding in the States. But then in Germany, his speech focused specifically on freedom of expression, freedom of speech. We'll talk a little bit later on the show. I think he
Yes.
just had a good week so far. He's looking in a real good position. He's easing in a good way to that VP role that he now has.
Certainly
But I'll
shine.
tell you, Daniel, when it comes to who's losing the week, I would say really Democrats are taking a big L. If you look at just a wide range of interviews and polling in the last few days, Bill Hemmer was on, not Bill Hemmer, Bill from HBO Hammer, I think it is. His name is Gabe. I'll correct it in a bit, but I mean he was on CNN with Anderson Cooper, and he was talking about how Democrats are unable to respond correctly to what Elon Musk, what Donald Trump, what this new administration is doing. They are completely out of touch with what the American people are asking for. And that was backed by a different interview from Frank Luntz, who was talking about that polling shows that voters like the light speed movement from Donald Trump. The fact that he is
Yes.
really going promise after promise on what he has said during the campaign show. So I think there's a
It
real
certainly bit of more, and
lost
it's
in
got the
Democrats.
Democrats on their heels, doesn't it?
100%. They're just not finding their footing in this space at all. I mean, they're losing the narrative. There's a lack of leadership on their end. They're wrong on the issues. They're wrong on their messaging. So they're continuing to take a big L for me on this week. But speaking of JD Vance, which I said earlier, Daniel, I mentioned the speech that he did in Germany. There's a reality that between the United States when it comes to free speech and what Europe is living right now in places like England and places like Germany, where the government is coming out with these rules on how you can engage on social media, in person. People having their phones taken away, like it's elementary school. People going to jail for what they're now labeling as serious offenses related to freedom of speech or hate speech. In your opinion, what are the consequences of what we're seeing there in this space over there in Europe?
Well, Wadi, first let me say that you're right. I think that the speech given by J.D. Vance was an important one. I think was a historic one. He went into their house and laid down some truth in their face, and they were taken aback by the boldness of what JD had to say, but he basically held up a mirror to them and showed them their ugly side of this suppression of speech that is happening across Europe. And I think he did that with the conviction that he saw what was happening here in the US under the Biden administration, where folks with different views, center right, or because of their faith, there was a selective prosecution of those who are expressing their conscience, their faith. Those 23 abortion protesters, who were jailed for 5 years in prison, that were pardoned by Trump, for example. The fact that a baker now has to write on a cake something that goes against their own faith and conscience. Look, irrespective of how you feel about LGBT issues, you shouldn't have to force someone to write something they don't agree with, on anything. And so, it's like imposing the rights of one on and obligating somebody else to be submissive to the super rights of the other group. I don't understand that. That's basically what like, let's say you're a socialist and I'm a capitalist, and you come to me and you say, I want you as a poet or as a writer, to write me something pro-socialist. Well, I'm not going to do that. Well, why not? You will have to do that, and then the state obligates you to do it. But that goes against my conscience. It's the same concept, It's like, and so what's happening in Europe is you can't even speak against abortion in some of the countries. You can't even express your faith because it goes contradictory to what the state position is. You can't even speak about the feelings that you have about an individual politician in Germany. Imagine that. It's like that's like essential, I think, to free speech is to speak against a politician. We tarred and feathered politicians during the revolution, that we were so adamant about, expressing our positions, and that's been under attack. The freedoms of conscience, the freedom of speech, and so a state that has, I think, gotten away or started to create or feels a need to silence their own people, and even Wadi, to delegitimize the beliefs of the public, as J.D. Vance said. I think we're headed down a very dangerous direction. And what J.D. Vance did, fue una bomba. Yes, again, it was a speech that was, I think I'm going to say, was directed towards the American audience more than the European audience. But there's no question that it reverberated across Europe. And I saw some commentary, from some European media representatives who said, bravo, that's exactly what they needed to hear. And a lot of Europeans, I'll just say it, folks who have our shared values, the Western civilization, they feel that their country is not aligned anymore with those values, and that they need an intervention. And so for JD to go in there, into their house again, and tell it like it is, I think was very important. Look, at the end of the day, the last thing I'll say about this is the people in Europe, citizens themselves are unhappy with the sort of totalitarian top-down direction that these countries have been headed on. And you're starting to see that frustration play out in elections. You're seeing it in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Italy, even France now is trending right. In Spain, it's trending right. And even in Germany, they're afraid of this far radical right-wing party. It's leaning rightward because they don't like the direction that it's on. It's a top-down approach, and it's being rejected.
Yeah, 100%. One point you made, Daniel, which I had a similar observation, is that I really believe, although he was in Europe and he was speaking to a European audience that was physically there, I think he was really setting the tone for where the U.S. is now. I think he was
Yes.
sending a message to the American people. He was sending a message to the left. I mean, if we remember during the times of COVID, I mean, the Biden administration, a lot of folks from the left, when it came to censorship on social media, I mean, there really was an attack. And you saw a lot of folks on social media. And by folks, I mean the actual companies, right? Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg in recent months has shed light on really how the government, the Biden administration, was pulling strings. I mean, even the FBI
Coercively, yes.
specifically was the one kind of pulling the strings in the back. And I think JD Vance is now setting the tone to an American audience. Something that I think when you look at the left globally, I think the left in Europe is probably one of the stronger or one of the groups that really innovates in that space. It even
Yeah.
sounds kind of funny saying that, but they innovate when it comes to being progressives. And a lot of what they do tends to trickle down. These movements tend to start in Europe and then they move into the United States. I think JD Vance was planting a flag and saying, this is where we
No
stand as a
question.
country. This is where we stand as
Yeah.
an administration.
Well,
And he did
and
so in
to
a very
that point,
forceful way.
Wadi, I mean, I think of that Greta Thunberg, I think her name is, when she
Yeah,
did,
yeah, yeah. Climate change.
how dare you? How dare you? Right? It's like that's almost like the same attitude those people in the room had, like, how dare you come in here and tell us this, right? But they needed to hear that. And to your point, JD Vance was pretty much saying, you're not going to play the same game you were playing with under the Biden administration. This is a different administration, and we are going to reset, American values and American principles. And we're not going to kowtow to whatever Europe is selling. We're not buying it, and we're here to tell you that we are going to act unilateral when it comes to our value systems.
The expression that comes to mind is America's back. And it reminds me of this week. We also saw Donald Trump out on NASCAR leading the way
Right?
before the race. We saw the U.S. go against Canada in hockey, and on social media. America is back. And it reminds me of JD Vance being in Europe, setting the tone. America is back in the space of free speech again. So it's a great topic to continue to watch as
Yes.
I think this administration is going to lead on that topic.
Oh yeah, we haven't heard the
Daniel,
end of it.
switching over, I saw an article this week on the Wall Street Journal talking about how Wall Street and major corporations are really shifting in the DEI space
Yes.
on their policies, removing content from their websites. It's a trend that we're seeing. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more on the nuance side of things. There is a lot of these corporations who still want to engage customer audiences that they have from diverse backgrounds, even diverse languages. Many Hispanics who maybe get their advertising in Spanish, right? In your opinion, what is that sort of nuanced approach, right, between hiring based on color, on DEI, but also just hey, trying to engage diverse audience? What's the nuance there in your opinion?
Well, first, let me say, as a Latino, who grew up a farm worker, who had very, limited opportunities because of my lack of education growing up, or lack of positioning. I reject DEI. I reject DEI because it turns out it tries to they try to sell it to you on fairness and equity, right, and inclusion. Basically, that's what it means. But look, I think the results are derived out of obligation, that people are forced, to play a numbers game with no value, Wadi, placed on merit, on abilities, or on the effectiveness of a person. It's an attempt to really to mitigate one kind of discrimination and impose another kind of discrimination. How are you going to solve the discrimination issue by practicing discrimination? It makes no sense. It's incoherent, right? And it's also, I think, the promotion of a woke agenda in the private sector itself, by using DEI as sort of as a cover. And what I mean by that is that that equity is superior to equality. I would rather have equal opportunity than government, force top-down equity on society or on the private sector any day of the week. And more employer mandates by the state are good and necessary. They are not. That's statism, as far as I'm concerned. And the whole green agenda and the LGBT agenda, irrespective of how you feel about those issues, it's like they're being promoted within that DEI structure. And it's like, who needs more politics, in your life? And now they're bringing it, to the private sector and all these areas. So in my observation, DEI has sacrificed, I think, productivity, profit, in return for discrimination and based on race and on gender. Two immutable facts about a person, right? You cannot change your race. You cannot change your gender, yet you were going to discriminate based on exactly those things, and presume that somehow this is fairness and equity, or that this is the American way. We were talking about our value system now, and this administration has entirely changed direction, and I think they're showing the way for the private sector. It's given license to the private sector because it hasn't worked. It's created more division. I think it's created less productivity, less profit. And so why continue down this direction if it's not helping? And in the end, it's also created more division, within people themselves and within races and within genders, more than anything else. I want to return back to an era where, we look at the content of the character of a person instead of just the color of their skin.
I think it also takes away some pride from the individual, right? I mean, I was blessed to go to 2 years of community college, then transferred over to the University of Maryland. I worked in Congress for 4 years. I've worked on campaigns. All things considered, I've been blessed to have, good jobs. If I go back and someone tells me, oh, you were just a number, right? We were trying to meet a DEI quota. We didn't hire you on your skill set, on your competitiveness, on the value you brought. It almost like takes away from me at that point. I'm like, okay, it's not my value as an individual. The hard work that I've put over the years trying to become a professional in my industry. Now I just become a number, a quota that they're trying to meet. And I think our communities across the board have proven that we're competitive. We're competitive in the arts. We're competitive in a business. We're competitive
100%.
in small entrepreneurs. And it takes a little bit of that weight. You also said something interesting when you look at DEI and you look at some of these other subgroups that are trying to sort of sneak in under this space. Because when you look at DEI and the type of promotion that's been done in like Latin America, I know I've heard again Honduras. What's the need for DEI in Honduras if it's a majority Hispanic country? Granted, there are some immigrants, but I mean, like, what are you pushing then? And
they're pushing ideology.
It's an ideology beyond just like,
exactly
trying to make all people have an opportunity. That's not what it is.
And the whole notion of equity, it requires government to enforce equal outcomes. It undermines individualism, and I think it imposes the collective. And that's anti-American, that's anti-capitalism, right? It's like, I want to know, if I, build a job, that I'm hiring the right people for the right job, the best people for the best job. And sometimes that's the minority, and sometimes that's the woman. That's great. That's terrific, right? But I look at the individual, I look at their merits, I look at their effectiveness and their abilities to do the job. And for government, to enforce a system where I now have to play the numbers game under quotas, again, that's just anti-American.
Yeah, it's anti-American. It's not the landscape that I think most people want in our countries or in our country. Well, Daniel, moving on to another topic this week. It's really been trending. It's Homan versus AOC. Last week, we talked about Tom Homan versus the Pope. We analyzed and we observed and we talked about how really Homan was correct for calling out the Pope on really his misrepresentation or his wrongful analysis of what's going on in the United States in relation to border security, in relation to immigration. But this week it's a little bit of a shift. It's now Homan versus AOC. He's really calling on the DOJ to look into AOC, Congresswoman from New York, because she has been essentially telling immigrant families what their rights are in the United States. What's your opinion on his approach here? Is this productive? Is it effective? Or is it counterproductive?
Yeah, look, man, this ain't gonna make me a fan of some people, being a conservative Republican that I am. But I gotta tell you, I have issues with this, with Homan, and I'll tell you why. I'm no fan of AOC, God knows, right? But threatening any congressional member with flimsy charges, um, and then to threaten to arrest them, because they don't placate to your agenda, is not productive to your cause. And I think this is a mistake, right? You are an appointed official of the president of the United States. And I think it's unbecoming also of Tom Homan to insult her that way, to call her the stupidest representative in the House. Even if you feel that way, I don't think you should be expressing yourself when you're representing the United States of America. This isn't Tom Homan speaking anymore. This is the United States of America. This is the official position of the U.S. government. And for you to carry yourself that way, even if it is AOC, I don't agree with it. I don't like it. And I think he should apologize. And another thing, another point about Tom Homan's remarks is that folks who have entered the U.S. without prior authorization, the undocumented people, illegals, if you want to call them that, they do have rights. And Tom Homan doesn't get to strip those rights away. They will have due process. And when they're in America, they're going to be treated with respect and with dignity, right? And so, look, I understand. I agree with Tom Homan on the deportation of folks that are here without authorization. And I want to see the deportation of all these criminals immediately. And I applaud that effort. But at the same time, you're a representative of the United States of America. Act like it.
Yeah, it's in my opinion, an unneeded distraction
Yeah.
when it comes to what is his main objective. I think if he stays focused on that objective and reaching that objective, I mean, he has the law on his side. There's no need to go into these sort of smaller fights. The difference here with the Pope is I think he said his comments and he moved on, versus here he's saying comments, but now he's asking another department within the executive branch or
Yeah.
within the
Well, he
judicial
simply
branch.
disagreed with the Pope, right? And he expressed that, that disagreement. But I think here he's starting to suffer a little bit from hubris, and he should tone it down.
Yeah, I think that would be the best thing. Go back to the main objective here and being able to just focus on what that is. But Daniel, focusing on immigration, there are also other topics that we're looking at. We're looking at the economy. We're looking at crime, specifically when we go to places like California. There's so many people. I live in Florida. Every day we hear stories of people moving from New York, people moving from California. You're in Texas. The amount of also people from California have moved there.
Right.
They talk about crime. They talk about high taxes. This week, a video of Jimmy Butler, who used to play for the Miami Heat just 2 weeks ago, now got transferred to the Golden State Warriors. I mean, he makes, I think, approximately like 25 million a year. There's a video going viral of him at the gas station complaining about how expensive gas is in California compared to his previous home state of Florida. There's a governor's race that's going to be coming up. There's some people who believe that because of all these issues facing the state, there's a chance that a GOP candidate might be able to make a dent and might be able to maybe sway the state a little bit red. What do you think? What's your opinion? You're from California. What are your thoughts there?
Well, it just chokes me up, Waddy, that Jimmy Butler's, value of the dollar has dramatically gone down, moving from one coast to the other, right? But that's what you get in California. And
Wait.
I've always found it amazing, Waddy, that, we have the same percentage of Latinos in Texas as California does. And
Hmm.
yet there are no statewide elected officials who are Democrat in the entire state of Texas. But there
Hmm.
are no statewide elected Republicans in the entire state of California, right? Wow. And that really shows the contrast between one state and the other, a blue state and a red state. But can California go red? I mean, look, the signs are there. You know, Jimmy Butler, I think, being frustrated over what's happening is sort of a microcosm of what is happening across the entire state right now. 72% of counties in the state moved more Republican in the 2024 election. 72% of the counties. Governor Newsom's favorability is in the tank. The LA mayor, the same. I mean, she handled the fires horribly. 71% of Californians voted to endorse by 71%, huh? That Proposition 36, which was a statewide ballot initiative that imposed harsher penalties, you know, for repeat theft and crimes. They're done with this soft on crime policies. I mean, look, in San Francisco, that uber progressive mayor, London Breed, got voted out in San Francisco, right? You know, and so Republicans need to pounce, right? I think they need to be showing an aggressive offensive, storm the beaches, you know, send in the paratroopers and air assault. It's go time right now in California, as far as I'm concerned.
If they're strategic, I think they can make a little bit of headwind. I was gonna say earlier, wait until Jimmy Butler sees that first paycheck where in Florida he paid no state income tax, and now he's gonna be paying a hefty fee when he sees that first paycheck. If he thinks, I think it was $140 on gas was a lot. Taxes in California are definitely no joke. But what I find interesting with adding on to what you said is it's I think California has historically been you can divide into different regions, right? You can look at LA
Sure,
and
it's
kind of
like
talk
five
about
states in
Hollywood.
one. Yeah,
You can talk at the Central Valley, and it's
right.
very ag, a lot more Republicans in that space. And then Northern California, really in your Silicon Valley or San
Yeah,
Francisco
Sacramento, the Bay
and
Area.
Sacramento, you've had these places that have been strongholds, North and South, for Democrats. But I think in Northern California, in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, you saw this shift
Yes.
of these individuals who I remember this was probably August that they hosted in Silicon Valley Donald Trump, where really you saw a lot of these tycoons, a lot of these startup folks come together and say, let's hear them out. If I remember when the story was leaked prior to the fundraiser, it was a lot of folks who donated to Trump because they wanted an appearance with him. But a lot the story said that these folks weren't saying we're 100% on Trump. They're saying we want to hear from him. We're open to it. We're not satisfied
Right.
with the direction of we seen the country and if these leftist policies. And it was at that moment, I remember the article saying that was the shift for people in Silicon Valley where they were tired of wokeism. They were tired of employees trying to push an agenda through the business when the business itself, places like Google, like Uber, they have their objective is to serve people. It's to be that service to people, not to push an ideology. I think there's an appetite in California. I think the right candidate has to emerge. They have to focus on the issues. They have to have the right ideas. They have to engage Latino voters, women voters, American voters across the board. If they do that early on, there's an appetite and there could be a surprise. Democrats, again, they're not, I don't think they're having their footing. This might be the state that they might see a big upset. Time will tell. It's going to be an
Yeah.
interesting one moving forward on
Well,
that.
and I understand too that it's been a series of broken promises and these sort of grand but false narratives, that they're going to create this utopia in California. And I think a lot of celebrities, a lot of folks who were very well off in the Palisades and that area after the fire were really disappointed with the Democrat leadership, in the way they failed to respond, in the way their policies actually worsened, the crisis, and maybe even induced some of the fires, because of the lack of water, the lack of preparation with, the personnel and the rescue teams and the fire emergency teams that were not at adequate levels because of the mismanagement of funding, because they focused on DEI initiatives or other, woke agenda items. So all this virtue signaling, I think, really was exposed, and a lot of folks, these sort of latte sipping kind of well-to-dos, really opened their eyes, and a lot of them I think were red pilled even. But aside from that, sort of higher end, upper middle class set as well. And look, and I don't want to belittle, the experience of Jimmy Butler because I'm pretty sure he's feeling the pain, right? But imagine the folks in the Central Valley who live in the same state, who live as farm workers, as landscapers, who tar hot roofs, who wash, the dishes in the hot rooms in the back of a restaurant, who clean the hotel rooms, they don't get paid as much. They're barely making it, scratching by, but yet they have to abide by the same regulations and rules and restrictions and taxation. They are getting clobbered, and which is why they're leaving the state. And in the Central Valley, for the longest time, has trended right and have elected a score of GOP congressional members, to Congress, and that is starting to expand even more. And so I think you're going to see that across the state now, where folks are just, that's it. They've had it. They're fed up.
Well, in November last year, America went red toward the White House. Let's see what California looks like in their next election when it comes to that governor's race. Danny, we covered a wide range of topics today.
Yes.
We want to remind folks to subscribe. We're on YouTube, Spotify. People can also follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and coming soon on X. Make sure to follow, stay up to date with everything that we're covering here on Garza, Gaitan, and the game. That's been our episode number 2. Thank you for joining us. Danny, as always, you're excited for number 3 coming up?
I am actually. Let's just say that in the arena for the next game, we're going to have a special guest, and so I'm looking forward to that. We'll announce it very soon. And this person, you'd be surprised with what he has to say. So I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. All right, everybody, stay tuned.